Good morning. It is Monday, the 18th of May. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily date with Brussels news and beyond. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, in one of the worst attacks on Russian soil since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a Ukrainian drone has struck Moscow, killing 4 people and injuring dozens. Zelensky says the strikes were, quote, entirely justified in response to Russia's ongoing attacks on Ukraine. We'll bring you up to speed on a conflict with no end in sight. And the World Health Organization has declared a global health emergency over an Ebola outbreak that has killed more than 80 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It comes as the UN agency gathers in Geneva to finalise a treaty aimed at protecting the world from pandemic threats. Meanwhile, 10 years since the UK voted to leave the European Union, Brexit is back. Since the Health Secretary Wes Streeting stepped down and said he would actually like to lead the country and bring it back to Brussels, there's a national debate sparking. But first, our top story, which takes us to Andalusia in southern Spain, where Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez's Socialist Party suffered a bruising defeat in regional elections. The votes are, of course, being closely watched both in Madrid and Brussels. Now, the Conservative People's Party did win the election, but they'll still need the support of the far-right Vox Party in order to govern. For more on what this all means for Spain and for Brussels, our Europe editor Maria Tadeo is here with us this morning. So Maria, really bad night there for Pedro Sánchez and his party. What are the consequences of all this?
Well, look, Maeve, it was a disastrous night. No question for the Spanish Socialist Party. Is their worst result in democratic history in a region which is roughly the size of Portugal, but also used to be their historic stronghold. Again, back-to-back losses this election, but also 4 years ago, which again cement this idea that this is a region that has now shifted to the right. For Pedro Sánchez, this is also a problem because the candidate representing the party was someone who was a minister in his government, a former deputy prime minister of the government of Spain, and a woman, a candidate that he had selected for this campaign. So it was very much appointed with the consent of the prime minister, already with a national profile, and all of this we see in the end produced no results in the election. The other point that is relevant about this vote yesterday is the Spanish Conservatives, very mainstream, Partido Popular, PP. They did win the election but fell short of a majority and now will need the hard-right Vox to govern. What this says to me, and I know this is going to sound counterintuitive at this point, but it really shows that there is a pivot to the right in Spain, which does not seem obvious, of course, because the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, has created this international profile for himself. He has positioned very successfully, I would argue, from a communications perspective as the man that will stand up to President Donald Trump. We talked about this big convention that he hosted 3 weeks ago in Barcelona. He's been able to really electrify this international progressive coalition. But back home, there is a big gap between his international perception and the national perception in the country, which is of a man who is polarizing, to say the least, and who also, when you look at the regional ballots so far this year, you have seen this perpetuation of the right winning for the Spanish Prime Minister. Of course, the big question is whether or not he can change the situation going into the 2027 election. He does tend to perform better nationally than regionally, but nonetheless, when you put all of this together, it does suggest that the country is tilting to the right, contrary to this international image of Spain, which for me is a fascinating phenomenon, but it does show there is this big gap externally and within the country.
And there's another pickle, of course. The Spanish government is in damage control, Maria, over claims they used EU funding for pensions. Tell us more.
Well, yes. Look, Maeve, this goes back to a report by the Spanish budget watchdog. They indicated that in November 2024, they used budget credits, which is not necessarily European funding per se, but it was connected to a clause in relation to the RFF, which, of course, is the recovery fund put together by the European Union, paid for, of course, by joint debt backed by the EU 27. The Spanish government told Euronews, and they told myself, as sources very close to the Spanish economy ministry, that they categorically deny that European money is being used to pay for pensions. They say this is not the case. They also told me, and as I understand, the European Commission did ask for an explanation. They did ask for a clarification after Spain provided a technical explanation saying this is an accounting issue. The Commission does not indicate that there is any wrongdoing or misuse of funding, but nonetheless, this is politics and this is about the optics. The damage to some extent is already done. And Maeve, we should keep in mind this is coming right before negotiations around the European budget kickstart. And of course, is already fueling some of the tensions between the southern European countries and some of the frugal countries, northern European countries, which traditionally, historically have said they do not want a big budget and they do not want joint funding to become permanent.
That debate that never goes away. Maria Steo, thank you so much for that very comprehensive analysis there. And now moving on to the ongoing war in Ukraine. This weekend, in response to a major attack on Kyiv, Ukraine's largest drone strike so far hit Russia, killing at least 4 people, including 3 near Moscow and wounding a dozen others. Debris fell on Russia's largest airport, causing disruptions, but no damage. For more, we're joined here in the studio by our Ukraine correspondent. That's, of course, Sasha Vakalina. Tell us more about this attack on Russia.
Yes, indeed. As you said, this was one of the largest attacks. In fact, according to Russian officials, it was the largest when it comes to Moscow in over a year. Kyiv confirmed the attack, saying they specifically targeted military, industrial and fuel infrastructure in Moscow region, including a plant which produces semiconductors for Russia's military-industrial complex, also 2 pumping stations and Moscow oil refinery. Now, Russian authorities said the residential building was also damaged during the attack. According to Russia's defense ministry, in general, they have intercepted allegedly over 1,000 drones on Russia. That was according to the to Moscow officials. That was the scale of this attack, Maeve. And of course, this is not the furthest attack that Ukraine did in terms of the long-range distance, but it was very significant given that this is indeed Russia's capital.
Yeah, it's very rare. And I'm sure our viewers this morning are thinking the same. Why do they target Moscow?
Well, for Kyiv, that was a clear demonstration of its capabilities. This is a very clear and simple message that Kyiv can reach Moscow if it wants to. Moscow, of course, being Russia's most protected city in terms of air defense. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, he did call it entirely justified, and he also tweeted about the attack, saying our responses to Russia's prolongation of the war and its attacks on our cities and communities are entirely justified. Ukrainian long-range sanctions reached the Moscow region, and we are clearly telling the Russians their state must end its war. Now, what he means here is, of course, the attack last week on Kyiv when the residential building was hit and 24 people were killed in that Russian attack. Volodymyr Zelensky in this case is sending the message that he can indeed move Russia's war back to Russia's territory. And we can see the effect of it given the scale of the fear and also all these videos on social media by Moscow residents showing that attack, Maeve.
OK, Sasha Vakalina, thank you so much for that update. Now, moving on to the Middle East, where a drone strike has triggered a fire near a nuclear plant in the United Arab Emirates. The incident that has been condemned by the region and the International Atomic Energy Agency highlights just how fragile the ceasefire between the US and Iran really is. For more, we can head straight over to Qatar, where our correspondent Adel Khalim is standing by for us this morning. Tell us, what is the latest on this nuclear plant bombing, Adel?
Yeah, Maeve, this is really the kind of incident that Gulf countries were hoping to avoid. While the ceasefire is still technically in place, clearly tensions never went away. Now, what happened on Sunday was a drone hit the perimeter of the Baraka power plant in the UAE, just outside the, which roughly supplies about a quarter of the country's energy. Now, according to Emirati officials, now 3 drones entered UAE airspace from the west and hit the electrical generator outside the main facility, sparking a fire. Now, the Abu Dhabi media office was quick to report there was no radiation leak, no injuries reported. In fact, the generators were continuing to operate as normally. But even without casualties, this is hugely symbolic. Any attack on a nuclear facility raises serious questions. And while the UAE didn't publicly blame Iran, Analysts do say this was a warning shot as regional tensions continue to escalate once again. Maeve?
And Adele, President Trump and Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi have reacted to this. We can actually together take a listen to what they have to say.
I could say this with very, very strong conviction. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. Not going to happen. They have no Navy, no Air Force, no anti-anything. By the way, we knocked out 85% of their manufacturing for the missiles.
An attack on our nuclear facilities has already taken place once, and they claim they completely destroyed them. Yet now they're once again talking about attacking the facilities. These contradictory statements truly indicate the depth of America's confusion regarding their objectives in this war.
So as you can see, their tensions have clearly not gone away. And we're also hearing, Adele, that Israel and the US are planning to renew the war. What can you tell us?
Yeah, those comments really accentuate where we stand right now. Publicly, both sides are calling for diplomacy, but at the same time, they're preparing for the eventuality of a possibility of what could come next. Iranian officials have openly said that during the ceasefire, they were able to regroup and restock their strike systems. Meanwhile, military activity across the region hasn't slowed down. U.S. Central Command says American naval forces continuing their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And as of Sunday, it says 81 commercial vessels were redirected and 4 disabled. And as you mentioned, there are reports that Israel and the U.S. are coordinating future strikes if negotiations fail. To that end, U.S. President Donald Trump doubled down on his Truth Social account, saying for Iran, the clock is ticking and they better get moving fast or there won't be anything left of them. Time is of the essence. So right now we're seeing technically the ceasefire still holds, but all parties are bracing for the possibility of what could come next. Maeve?
OK, very stressful time, of course, there for your region and the world. Thank you so much for that update there, Adel Khali. And now moving on. From the Netherlands to Sweden and then on to Oslo and Rome, India's Narendra Modi is on a whistle-stop tour across Europe, sitting down with various European leaders. After hosting foreign ministers from BRIC countries just last Friday, he's here to celebrate, of course, the historic EU-India deal signed earlier this year. For more on what to expect from his trip, here's our Jakob Janis.
Have you ever wondered how the world's fastest growing major economy manages a crisis at home while reshaping global trade? While New Delhi scrambles to protect a sinking rupee hit by energy shocks from the Iran war, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is launching a massive diplomatic offensive across Europe. And months after a historic EU-India free trade agreement, this tour executes that
mother of all deals
by balancing Brussels with individual capitals. And if we follow the Prime Minister's itinerary day by day, the calendar reveals exactly what's at stake. And over the weekend, Modi met with Dutch Prime Minister Rob Jetten. The Netherlands is a key trading partner for India, with bilateral trade worth nearly $28 billion. And the immediate prize is an $11 billion semiconductor deal between Tata Electronics and Dutch giant ASML to build a cutting-edge microchip plant in Western India. And it is a textbook example of Europe's China Plus One strategy, as Western companies rush to diversify supply chains away from Beijing. And now the focus shifts to Sweden, where today Modi is meeting Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen at the European Roundtable for Industry. And here is a side note. While capitals like Stockholm provide India with specific tech, defense and green transition deals, Brussels provides here the regulatory alignment and massive tariff cuts needed to unlock the entire European market. But hey, that's not all. Tomorrow, Modi attends the India-Nordic Summit in Oslo, engaging Nordic leaders on clean energy and Arctic shipping routes opened up by climate change. And this grand tour will conclude on Wednesday in Italy with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, where both leaders will focus on maritime security and a joint action plan for legal migration channels. And I know, it sounds complex, but one thing is certain. For European leaders facing slowing economies, rolling out the red carpet is no longer a luxury. It is a strategic necessity. And the world's most populous nation becomes an indispensable geopolitical counterweight when Europe's historic partners look away.
Jakob Janis there for us. And now for the view from Finland. Coming up, we'll be joined by Ville Tavio, Finnish Minister for Foreign Trade and Development, in Brussels today for talks with ministers from all across the EU. Ville Tavio is a member of the National Conservative Finns Party and he's been active in national politics for several years. Good morning, Minister. Lovely to have you with us.
Good morning. Great to be here.
So first, we're of course looking at those pictures of the Indian head of state travelling all across Europe. This comes just after that big historic deal was signed. What's Finland's view here? What's your view here?
Well, the Finnish president also had a state visit to India a couple of months ago. And it's absolutely one strategic partnership in order to diverse the trade.
And tell me, it comes just a couple of days after India hosted BRICS foreign ministers. So is there anything the European Union can do to put pressure on India to help end the war in Ukraine?
I'd really hope so, of course, and that's one of the reasons that Finland thinks it's important to have these close relations. But I would say that rather recently we've seen development in the trade and the quest in diversification of trade and China +1 mission instead of focusing only in these difficult topics.
Because of course you had that drone incident on Friday, which seems to have been settled. But let's talk about this big week for the EU-US trade deal that could get over the line by June. But in the European Parliament, we're seeing a lot of different debates. There'll be trilogues this week, so negotiations on whether or not to put conditions on this deal that, of course, as you know, is pretty controversial. But putting conditions on it at this late stage, could that not anger President Donald Trump? What is your view here?
Well, we are in favour of forcing what's agreed, and we see cautious optimism that the trilogues are moving very well, to my knowledge. So after all, we want to create bridges and not to burn bridges. So
but do you trust President Trump? He can be very unpredictable and cause a lot of stress for European businesses and Finnish businesses.
We are not expecting predictability from him, but I think he's a hard negotiator. I think it's debatable whether USA has kind of benefited from his actions. Maybe we'll see that at the end of his term. But from the Europe's point of view, we want to keep on the trade growing. We want to build a steady trade. That's what the companies need.
But if Donald Trump plays hardball, should the Europeans play hardball too?
Yes, me and several other ministers, we've taken stances before, whereas we think the European Union should have used the package we made in order to pressure USA more. But at this point, we are ready to move forward with the deal as agreed. And of course, our requirement is that the USA also respects this deal.
And a big week as well for the EU. They're heading to Mexico this week. Could a deal be signed there? We know the last EU-Mexico summit was back in 2015.
Yes, we are looking for renewing the global treaty with EU Mexico, and that's it's a very important point. You know, we have the Mercosur trade deal already applied, so that doesn't include Mexico. So it's very good that we get a new deal with Mexico as well. It's our second largest partner in the Latin America.
And meanwhile, of course, big focus of your talks this week on the impact the ongoing war in the Middle East is having on Europeans. Do you think enough has been done by Brussels, i.e. the European Commission, in order to soften that blow on Europeans?
Well, from the trade minister point of view, I can tell that the past 3 years that I've been a minister of trade, it's the security concerns have been rising all the time. So I think trade ministers are more dealing with the security concerns and increasingly involved in the security issues. So whether it's diversification of trade, but also energy, basic supply chains, now wartime discomforts.
OK, Minister, Thank you so much for coming into us here today on Euronews and being our guest on Europe Today. That does bring, though, this edition of Europe Today to an end. Any points, comments, questions for us, you can always reach out at europetoday@euronews.com. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. Take care and do visit euronews.com for more news and analysis.